there's no question our structure and lack of structure created far more problems than needed to be there. Now, hindsight's 2020, right? It wasn't like you were intentionally trying to do that, but there's no question that structures can serve even a system like we had far more efficiently and better than we did, than my leadership drove to get us to.
Every week on More Than Profit, we explore the stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and investors who have made a difference in the world while building successful businesses. We sit down with each guest and dive into their personal journey, their struggles and triumphs, and the lessons they've learned along the way. On this episode, we sit down with Tyler Johnson, the founder of Redemption Church, a multi-congregational church with 10 locations across the state of Arizona. While leading Redemption, he also co-founded the Surge Network, a collaborative partnership of Christian congregations that align to prepare leaders in all fields of life to be God's people in prayer and presence at the places of the world's deepest need. He also co-founded the Missional Training Center, a pioneering theological education project designed around a pedagogy of love meant to form church leaders for the complexities of the 21st century and beyond. Tyler also founded The Human Element, a cultural curation partnership equipping organizations to design around their most potent capital, human beings. Tyler's leadership life revolves around trusting people, and he also extends this vision by serving on the boards of multi-nonprofits in Arizona, and he has acquired leadership experience in the areas of entrepreneurship, peacemaking, organizational design, multi-faith dialogue, relational reconciliation, and urban movement. His lessons from leading a multi-congregational church and his honesty in what works and hasn't are applicable lessons in any business, specifically those businesses scaling faster than they ever thought possible.
With our guest today, I'm always reminded of the importance of church and business. Does that even make sense to say that church and business are important together when you combine the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times people don't recognize the church as a business, that the church has a lot of different functions. And yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is, I don't know, even some of our listeners may not even be aware that I used to be a pastor, and so did you, Brian. Like we both.
I was not a good pastor, but I was a pastor. Yeah.
For me, I went to seminary not really to be a pastor, but coming out of the military, my background was more strategic planning and operations. And so I kind of fell into a role at a church that was really more on the business side of church. I was the executive pastor, and I found that I actually really liked it. And that's kind of what led me down this path of business and for the last decade or so. But Brian, what about you? Like, how did you end up becoming a pastor?
Well, again, I have no idea. I was told ever since I was little, I was in high school, my career counselor, my number one vocational profession was pastor. And I grew up going to Lutheran church, but I just knew there was no money being a pastor. So I laughed and I said, no way. But I always have a leaning towards caring for people. And so I think that's been true. And that's with our guest today. So Tyler Johnson is our guest today. And I would say, if you live in Arizona, you know who Tyler Johnson is, because within business and church, I mean, he's been very involved with both. And I think he's done it really well. But anyway, so we have him as our guest, and Tyler's been a good friend to Bryce and I over the years. And so we're excited to have him. He's in some transition, which we'll talk about, the good and bad in transition in churches. But I really look forward to having him dispense lots of pearls of wisdom. So that's what we want from you today, Tyler, is lots of pearls of wisdom. Let them flow, let them fall. Amen and amen.
So Tyler, for you, thanks for your time, but you've been a pastor now for well over a decade, leading Redemption, which if you're not familiar, Redemption it's one big church, basically 10 churches in one, with locations across Arizona. And you kind of help get that going. What was your kind of journey to becoming a pastor? Like, why did you even go down that route?
I didn't grow up in the church really at all. I mean, I had some church background because my grandmother was United Methodist, and a couple times a year would essentially get me to go to Sunday school at the United Methodist Church just south of the city of Denver in Inglewood. I came to faith right as a recruiting process was happening because my background's in baseball. So recruiting kind of starts in your junior year. I had a real strong experience with Jesus and really was trying to make sense of it. So I ended up at Arizona State University as a baseball player, trying to make sense of my faith and this thing that had been my whole entire life. And baseball literally had been my entire life, not just because I was a player, but my father's a really prominent amateur baseball coach.
And when you say that, really prominent, like he's really,
Yeah, he's a big deal. I mean, if you're in the baseball world at any level, my dad is a very known guy. If you know basketball and Bobby Hurley's dad was a high school basketball coach, very well known nationally, big stories. That's my dad's like that in baseball. I mean, he's a very reputable 18 and under, coached multiple US national teams, always been involved in professional sports because they draft so much at an amateur 18 and under level. So that was really my whole world. And I was in the baseball program at ASU for 5 years. And in the middle of that, had a lot of people talking to me about, have you ever thought ministry? And at the time, I just thought, well, ministry could only mean sports ministry, Fellowship for Christian Athletes, Athletes in Action, because that had been my whole life. When someone came to me about local church, honestly, I was like, there's no chance, not because I was anti-church, but because it was so foreign to me. And Bryce, honestly, long and short of it was I don't know any other way to say it than as much as a young 20-year-old can make sense of it, I felt like God called me into doing this. And I actually said no to some opportunities to play professional baseball because I felt very much like God had called me to go into this world that I knew nothing about.
wish you made different choices now, don't you?
That's yeah. I look back and go, there was a lot of stupidity in a young 20-year-old. A lot of
Yeah.
idealism.
Yeah, idealism. That's good.
So Tyler, we kind of started off by talking a little bit about the church as a business. And you and I have talked about this before. Again, I think the idealism of your youth sent you to seminary, sent you to kind of become a pastor, but I don't think you went into it thinking, I'm going to be running a business, maybe running a staff, and I'm going to have all these staff meetings. You know, I didn't go to seminary myself for any other reason than just theological training. But then you really get into it, and where I ended up spending, and my role was different than yours, where you end up spending a lot of your time is really on the business of church. And I don't think a lot of people from the outside looking in really think about the church as a business. And why do you think it's important that, you know, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, that you really fundamentally understand that the church in America specifically is a business, and the benefits of that, the cons of that? Like, why is it important that we at least acknowledge that, whether or not it's training pastors that are going into churches and the fact that we don't train them in business, but what is it about the church as a business that is both good and bad right now in America?
Yeah, I mean, when you were saying that, I thought about that famous Solzhenitsyn quote of the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every human being, and saying that's much more the truth of reality all the time, is that there's good and bad in everything, which we could get into a theological interpretation of that, but there is good and bad of business. And so the minute you decide to start paying somebody and it goes to multiple people, I mean, even if it's one person, business dynamics come in. How are you going to do this? Is there insurance offered? Is there insurance not offered? Are you going to do a retirement program? Who's responsible to ensure there's accountability to the person being paid? So the minute you begin to apply this, you know, there's a passage in the Bible that those who work amongst you in teaching and in care should be paid. They're worthy of double honors, what the Bible says. Well, the minute you start putting any type of money into something, business dynamics come out of it. So the more that scales, the more you go, their church really is a business. And a lot of times I think that gets used as a big critique, which I think there's valid critiques in it. I really do. Having been in it, I mean, you mentioned over a decade. I mean, I've been in this over 20 years in a church, you know, that is a multi-million-dollar budget. I mean, this year in our church, I mean, it'll be a 13 plus annual budget, gobs of assets. So there's huge business dynamics to it. And there's potential for substantial good in that, and there's potential for substantial bad in it, but it is reality. I mean, at some level, you could neutrally just say it isn't good or bad. It's just real.
And I think the idealism of any kind of social organization, so we're talking about a church, but it could be anything, like people that are a part of it, oftentimes they go into it with all of the rose-colored glasses, the idealism, and they think of this is a community. We're friends, we're family, and they don't even like layer in that thinking of like what you were talking about. Like the minute you pay someone, then you have all of those dynamics, the good and the bad of a business. And what I've seen time and again is people oftentimes leaning too heavily on this kind of shared idealism, this community, this family, and ignoring the reality of what the business itself means, and then giving a little bit too much liberty or too much license for people that are making the decisions. So what I mean by that is in the decision making, in the power dynamics of how the business of a church is run, we've seen it kind of played out in the press of late, just the number of churches, the number of leaders that have kind of fallen for reasons mostly related to kind of pride and governance and leadership dysfunction, really in how they function within the business itself, that's manifest in how they treat people. But the things that they've done is mistreat employees, not consider better policies on how to report abuse. When you think about functions of business, yes, there's people wrapped up in that, but I think what happens is the church more broadly, or anybody in any type of social organization, is aghast when they hear about this. But if they actually understood that, really at the end of the day, we need to think about what are those structures of accountability, what are those policies and procedures, and how are we actually executing those across this organization. I think they'd understand that a little bit more. I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but that to me is something I think as broadly as a church, we really don't talk about a lot. And a lot of the problems I've seen kind of are manifest in those areas.
Yeah. I mean, you just did it, but I would just highlight two things you said is you can have, if you want to say, an over emphasis on the organizational and quote, I'm doing quotes with my hands, quote, leadership side, to where there's abusive practices, bad management, which I would say is, I'm doing quotes because I think it's bad leadership. But at the same time, in our worlds, I mean, a lot of the ways we've been exposed in the church have been leading is this over emphasis on relationship and relationships taking care of everything, and having these serious holes when it comes to the things like governance. So you can have a abdication of your leadership either through being a pompous, kind of abusive, overbearing leader, or passively thinking the relational thing will take care of everything. And both of them leave people in your wake. A la, if you don't have good systems and policies, people don't know how to report everything from abuse to being overlooked. That if you don't have good HR practices, and that's a lot of where I've been guilty as a leader, is not pressing enough on the value that the business side can bring to an organization. We have a very complex organization, have done some things really well, but some of the idealism missed these things that actual formalized procedures, policies, practices really can help people. I'm certain that's true in the marketplace overall as well, but there's maybe just a way you can baptize it and hide behind theology or saying, well, the church is not that, and in turn not care for people the way a church should.
Well, and I think that's kind of what I'm trying to highlight too, is like we do see it in the business side, right? In the business world, leaders that do something stupid, or they don't have the right policies in place or the procedures, whistleblower policies or whatever. And again, I think it boils down to bad structures and bad leaders, whether it's a church or not. Granted, within the church, we have other things that we're trying to accomplish beyond just moving programs and initiatives and maintaining properties and employing people. There's other kind of gospel-oriented, kingdom-oriented work that we're trying to do in the midst of that. But it's still, when you think about the dynamics of leadership, whether it's in the church or not, those problems are not unique just to the church.
Yeah, I really agree with that.
So Tyler, one of the things I think you've done, again, we could talk about that all day, but one of the things I think you've done really, really well, just kind of looking from the outside in, I think you have a real heart for collaboration and cooperation. And, this could be not just within your church, but also, I think, specifically and uniquely across churches, whether that's in kind of Phoenix or across denominations. I wanted to kind of get your perspectives on that a little bit and talk and have you kind of share a little bit more about that work, because I think today in our current culture, that's not normal. There's a lot of tribalism that I think exists within Christianity specifically. And what is important about the work that you're doing to really bring together different perspectives, even different faiths around a common good?
When you say that, it's been interesting, just like, because I've known him a long time, but just even going, I was with you in Washington, D.C., and you were bringing Muslims and Jews together. There was a group of people, and then Christians were invited to that too. And it was a really amazing dialogue. And I just think, your connection with even the Pope and the Catholic Church, and you've been doing things like this for years. So it wasn't like, so since I've known you, you've been involved globally with churches and, different denominations. So yeah, what's the motivation and why behind a lot of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would start on let's start on the broad level, like when you talk about the multi-faith category. And some people really, especially inside, let's just say evangelical churches, will get this real simplistic statement about pluralism and how evil it is. And what they mean by that is this real shallow view of pluralism that basically we're all the same, there isn't any difference, and belief systems don't think there's even eternal consequences or truth. So pluralism's kind of, can't we all just get along? And people that care about the truth will say that's bad. I agree with that, even on a reality level of when you walk into a lot of what would be like interfaith gatherings, a lot of the people that would be more conservative in their faiths always walk out and feel like, did I just compromise my faith? Because basically they said all Abrahamic religions are basically the same. And you're like, I don't believe that. Like, I'm not a Jew. I'm not a Muslim. I'm a Christian who believes Jesus is Lord. What does that mean? So the entrance into that stuff for me was the sense of there's a difference between pluralism as this shallow, can't we all just get along? We're basically the same, and pluralism as a reality. And what I mean by that is we live in a pluralistic public environment, public commons. We do. So my kids go to school with Muslims, they go to school with Hindus, they go to school with atheists. What does that mean to live together? And that's where there's this concept, which is not even close to originated by me, called principled pluralism, which is the idea of you live from your principles, your deepest level of convictions, but understand how to live amongst each other, seeking the good of the public environment, which could be your school, it could be your business, it could be as big as your city. That was very appealing to me on two levels. So the work I would do in multi-faith stuff, a lot of times when I would gather people together, I'd ask them, give me the reason why you would show up to this table. If you're a Muslim hanging out with Christians or hanging out with Jews or hanging out with atheists, what would make you come to this table? And every time I would answer it two ways. I'd say, my first principle, the guiding, driving factor of my whole life is Jesus. Jesus calls me to love my neighbor as myself, and I can't love my neighbor if I don't know my neighbor. And two, I want more people to know about Jesus. And that's why I would sit in this room. So part of loving your neighbor is the benefit of the whole public environment. So that was intriguing to me, was a deep conviction of a belief that if you're following Jesus, you're seeking the good of everybody who's around you. And at the most basic levels, like ensuring they have things to eat or ensuring they're seen and noticed, that in a city or a community, people that live in the shadows, when that happens at any level of scale, it isn't good for anybody, ever. So overlooked environments are never beneficial to the whole. So how the whole contributes to a public reality matters. So that's me talking about other faiths. When it comes to inside the Christian church, that I have a friend of mine named Joe that makes this statement that I think says it all, where he says, God is not a polygamist. Like, he has one bride. So that is an undeniable truth. If that's true, there's all kinds of questions around our tribalism that we have to begin to ask ourselves. of what that ultimately means. If Jesus has one bride and there's all these different types and stripes of Christians out there, what does that mean in how we relate to each other is a real question. I'm not saying it's an easy one, but it's a real one.
Yeah. Well,
Man, can you take that a little bit further for us? Because everything you're saying, I'm saying, yes, this is awesome. Because I remember like when I went to a more conservative evangelical seminary, and when I left pastoral ministry, I joined the Council on Interfaith Relations, because again, I stepped into the world of kind of common grace, common good, public squares. You kind of talk about it. And so I became a member of this council. And I remember going to meetings, and people would immediately find out I'd gone to seminary, and they found out where I went to seminary, and they would immediately look at my hair to figure out how old I was. And because I didn't have any gray hair, they didn't know, okay, was he here pre what was called Reformation or post? And so then they would ask, and like, well, when did you graduate? Because it was this funny thing in the tribe, if you will, that the seminary represented. They refer to that time and period as the Reformation, that they were reforming the seminary for the gospel. Everybody on the outside that kind of experienced that, and we're talking other Christians, right? Other Christians, they refer to it as the cleansing. And, you know, and it was just a really profound kind of experience for me, because it's like on both sides, there was a sense of righteousness. And also on both sides, there was a sense of a deep wounding for what had occurred, what had transpired. And we're talking between Christians. And so what you're saying really resonates. So could you go a little bit further then on that kind of interdenominational work? What are some things that you hope to see out of that? Because I would imagine that's something that's going to carry forward regardless of where you go. And what have you seen? Like, what are you specifically trying to do with that? And why do you think it matters? Obviously, the quote from your friend is provocative and part of that. But for you personally, like, what are you doing specifically?
In very direct form, I feel a deep desire to give visible demonstration to that reality, the one bride of Christ, for the purposes of, one, evangelism. So the John 17 prayer is in oneness. There is a manifestation of the brilliance of God. So you have this stated by Jesus. I think Paul picks up this theme a lot in the book of Ephesians. So on a practical level, it's like I could write a white paper, I could give a message. None of that is as powerful as an experience where many of your categories that erected walls of separation come down just based on an experience around a table, having a drink and eating, and finding out from a guy that's dressed, as a Franciscan, that you're like, this whole thing feels weird. And when he's like, I grew up a baseball player. And I'm like, I grew up a baseball player. And all of a sudden you start listening about his family life. Like, how did you find yourself into being a priest? And all of a sudden you're going, holy cow, there's a lot of commonality. Then they start talking about their heart for Jesus. And you go like, I was told Roman Catholics didn't believe in the Bible, and this guy's quoting more Bible to me than, like, what do I do with this? And so in the end, I want people to have experience and encounters of the brilliance and beauty of the whole body of Christ, because not just so that unbelieving people would come to see the brilliance of Jesus, but so that we would begin to say, wow, there's traditions that have thought about certain topics way longer than we have, which is probably more grandiose than even my ultimate desire is for people to have the wow moments I've had in interdenominational, let's just say, meals. It's that gritty. It's like we're putting tables out, we're eating, we're laughing, we're taking personalities like Brian McKay, putting them in. We're having everything from lofty to very gritty, earthy conversation along the way. And it's stunning of what happens with people when they encounter real people across lines that they've made meaning of, that I think the table shows at many levels we've made meaning the wrong ways. Like we've lied to ourselves. It's not true.
Today's financial institutions operate on a massive scale, and what used to be peer-to-peer practice, i.e. community lending, has developed into a large, centralized system designed to facilitate the exchange of value. Our modern and now global financial marketplace has evolved from simple to complex, with more and more opportunities for using capital popping up every day. At Access Ventures, we envision a world where small business owners can access the capital they need to improve on their early traction, and where entrepreneurs can secure capital that works for their businesses by leveraging equitable collateral that can be acquired regardless of class, race, and/or gender. Over a period of 8 years, from 2014 to 2022, we have modeled and tested our growth loan fund, and over that time period, we loaned over $1 million and activated and empowered a community of volunteers to serve as a loan committee and to support their fellow community members by saying yes instead of no when they needed capital. This playbook is an open source culmination of the steps we took and the lessons we learned in building a community-first, character-based lending process. To learn more and begin your journey to character-based lending, you can download the playbook from the show notes. Now back to the episode.
Again, back to kind of redemption and the work that you've done. You've built up quite a church. And I say you, it's not just you. You have a team. You're one of the first people I know to kind of point to the work of the many around you. But personally, as I've seen a lot of these quote unquote mega church, multi-site churches of late, they've imploded for one reason or another. A lot of it's bad leadership, I think bad structure. But I've looked at your church, and I'm sure there's been craziness. I mean, there always is at church, any church. But you've weathered some pretty impressive things and stayed unified as a church, as a leadership, as you've grown. I mean, you've got several thousand people now across the state. But what I've also known about you is you really, personally, it seems to me, thrive in those kind of smaller group environments. Like you can preach in front of the masses, but like what you're talking about, sitting around a table and doing the work of kind of gritty conversations, like you really thrive in those settings with people. How have you personally been able to do that work of kind of building a church at scale, kind of working with these teams and doing it seemingly well? What has that been like for you? And do you have any kind of even leadership principles that you've learned in order to do that at Redemption?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I think, and I don't know at what point this became very conscious for me, but it was pretty early of trying to look at what we, being given this role, having a real heart for mission. And that began to be early in my time church planting. And so you would hear, when I was early on, you would hear things like networks are the new denominations. And I remember just starting to think, like, why? Like, what was the problem with denominations, which people would easily point to things like bureaucracy, lack of feeling represented. So then these networks started, and I started having these questions. And I really do think, let me just pause, bracket, and say, I think this section has unbelievable application to marketplace realities of any kind. But I remember thinking to myself, like, in Phoenix, there's not denominational strongholds. Brian can testify to this. I mean, anybody here, it's not like, oh, this is a Baptist area, this is a Lutheran area. This was the Wild West. So all those places transplanted here, but none have like serious roots. What has roots here more than anything is these very independent, non-denominational churches, or ones that are a part of denominations, but they express themselves with far more individuality. My question began to be, with the rise of the non-denominational independent church, why were those churches then moving to networks? Like, what is the reality of what you're trying, human beings' nature to wanting to be distinct, which we could call independent, but then be in community, be in like a formation. And I, not to get too theological, I just think reality is built upon these distinct equal one categories, that there's a sense of your individuality, of who you are, a desire to be a part of a group and community, and this sense of that you're distinct, you're equal, that in difference there's equality, but then there's oneness, that kind of, which is the Trinity. And in the end, as a Christian, if you believe a triune God is upholding the universe, then if you ask the question of how you do organizational design in a way that corresponds to human nature, you want to give the whole idea of fully exploiting an individual's strength, whether that's an individual human, whether that's a team in your company, or your company in relation to, a larger group that owns multiple companies or whatever, is this sense of like, I want to fully exploit your strength means giving the room for some level of autonomy. So I would talk in this language of strength, alignment, and tension. The strength is autonomy, like individuality. The alignment is the sense of oneness, of like, if we are going to be one in something, we have to be aligned. And then tension is you have to expect and embrace tension. The minute you bring, even in a family or a marriage, you bring two individuals or multiple individuals together and try to create oneness, you better expect tension. And you better build in a training of resilience that can embrace it and understand there's a power in it. So to answer your question, Bryce, I think that thinking enabled us to create this multi-congregational thing where at the time, many people that wanted to be autonomous church planners joined a network and didn't feel like they were getting fully what they wanted, which was a thicker community. But then in the multi-site environment, many of these people, the best leaders were going, I don't want to just go be, this is inside language to church stuff, but a campus pastor. Like, I don't want to just be a manager. I do want to lead. So could you create an environment where it didn't feel like there was a glass ceiling on somebody? So if a pastor went, I'd like to grow a church of 2,500 people, not just a site, and I'd like to have a lot of autonomy doing it. That's what we tried to create. Now, that said, that all sounds amazing, but even currently, the holding something like that together is not easy. And it's exposed lack of structure, lack of understanding, lack of good training. So I don't want it to sound all glossy. It's been beautiful and very hard all at the same time.
Yeah, the difficulty, because a church community is not monolithic. I mean, you are all together, united in Christ. You're worshiping in kind of, let's just say, in the same direction, but you also are representative of unique and distinct communities. And so, what you've also tried to build within your network of churches, when you think about like autonomy and alignment, there's alignment, but that autonomy piece, what Flagstaff is experiencing is different than Mesa, is different than Tempe, is different than Scottsdale.
For sure.
And you would want it that way. And so as those people are living into that autonomy and trying to figure out and manifest for themselves what that looks like, that would be, to my understanding, extremely difficult. Because to your point, you want to design in tension, but are you designing a structure in such a way where there's almost unnecessary tension related to things that are even outside of that network's control? Does that make sense?
That makes a ton of sense. And I think that's a lot of when, as a leader, you look back and you try to think through what could we have done better, and you're planning for the future. I love this statement as a leader of ruthless realism. Like, be ruthlessly realistic. Don't try to, because in ruthless realism, you see the things you could do better for the future. And there's no question, our structure and lack of structure created far more problems than needed to be there. Now, hindsight's 2020, right? It wasn't like you were intentionally trying to do that, but there's no question that structures can serve even a system like we had far more efficiently and better than we did, than my leadership drove to get us to.
So you're saying you would have added more structure then?
Yeah. And with that, I mean, it's interesting when you think about structure to a system like we built, because there's a sense of like, there was always this battle for us on how much central control do you give in an environment like that. I was the biggest advocate. I mean, a lot of times in it, people would say, we should do this. And I tried to coin this idea of, let's not say we should do this and say we could do this. Because should in an environment where you have a lot of local autonomy and you're pushing decisions down to the lowest possible level, the more decisions central operations makes, I think the more tension you're going to create along the way. Now, that was a strength I think I brought. What I missed is I presumed a lot upon culture, that culture, the whole culture eats strategy for breakfast, which I believe to a level. I presumed way more on what was happening at a conviction and activation level than was really there. So you could say I do wish we had more central controls of evaluation and ensuring the direction we were going, people were actually owning and moving. This is all under my leadership. I am taking full responsibility. I mean, I joke right now in my environment with transition that's happening with me that Monty Williams, the Suns coach that just got fired, I think's a good leader. I think he's a very good coach, and I think he's an amazing guy. He still gets fired. Like there's still responsibility a leader holds, whether or not it was all his direct responsibility or all. The minute you sit at the top, you're responsible, and I'm responsible for a lot of stuff. I wish we would have done different. And in short, Brian, I do wish we would have had leaner but more thicker structure that I think could have helped a lot of people.
Well, and I've quoted Wendell Berry before. He's known for saying that fences bring freedom.
Yeah.
And because I think what it does is it gives people an idea of what's the sandbox in which I get to play. Where do I have freedom to maneuver? And if there are wide open ranges, to some people, that's a little unsettling. They don't know what's permissible, what's not. And so I think that when you're talking about structures, like that's the way I think about it. Like, how do we have proper guardrails so people feel freedom, so they have a sense of autonomy, but they understand where they have freedom to maneuver within certain and specific? Because I think another friend of mine yesterday was just sharing, and what I've experienced, and I think maybe what you're articulating, Tyler, as well, is oftentimes, especially in relationships, we are more kind and confusing versus direct and confident. And so, especially as leaders in a church, like we want to be kind, but then it's also confusing. And then we actually unintentionally create more tension than we needed to. And that leads to even greater problems. So
it's very good and true.
Well, so as we're having this conversation, Tyler, you're kind of in the midst of, a transition. You've been leading and kind of thinking through these things. I mean, obviously you've got a doctorate in global transformational leadership. So you kind of are steeped in this stuff. And I think one of the things that's really lent itself to your success, but you're transitioning yourself. You're kind of considering what's next for your career and your family. And what is that like for you as you think? One, I think as you look back, obviously I'm sure there's a lot of hindsight questions and conversations you're having with yourself. I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that. But as you're looking to the future, why is it important for you right now in this moment that you are making this change?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one level, there's moments in your life where I'm reading a book right now where a guy was asking himself the question, and I don't want this statement to be meaning to be made too much of it, but he makes this statement of he kind of got caught up in all the stuff he thought he wanted to do. And then he had this moment where he left a job and he felt this amazing release, which allowed him to go, why do I feel so good about leaving this position I was just in? And he began to say, a lot of what happened to me before was me kind of fitting a mold, mimicking an environment I was in that got me to the place I was. And it allowed him to ask these really substantial questions about desire and what was his ultimate desire. And for me, I think it's really important. I mean, if I'm going to be very directive, and this could be offensive to people I've been around, I don't want to do it anymore. I mean, that's a very easy level. And then trying, not because I think what I was doing was bad or because any of that, but I think there's moments when God moves you. I remember very early when I was in college and I was wrestling with, I forever wanted to be a professional baseball player. Baseball wasn't going the way I wanted it to. my Christianity's newfound, and I had come across the Psalm of delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. And I went to a mentor at the time and I said, if I feel like I'm delighting myself in God and the desires of my heart are to be a professional baseball player, why wouldn't God give me that? And he said, if it's not God's desire for you, he'll change your desires. And I remember during that time feeling like a pendulum swing, like all these things I thought I wanted were kind of going away, but all the things I could move into, I didn't really care about at all. And I sat at this neutral zone of almost what felt like apathy. But as I look back on it, I think God was changing the desires of my heart because, not to sound too overly spiritual, he may have a new assignment for you or a new place for you to put your feet. And that's, I think more than anything, it's important for me right now because with where my desires are, I could not be a good executive leader in the organization I've been in. So for the sake of the organization and the good of where I want to be, I can't look myself in the mirror and, know God's watching and feel like I have integrity by staying in the role.
It's good.
Yeah. And the funny thing is I'm listening to you talk, and the other thing I'm thinking about is I'm sure your family saw it even before you did, because I'm thinking about my transition over a decade ago. And, it's pretty evident because I think oftentimes we cling, like you were saying, we kind of fit a mold and then we kind of feel a sense of, I don't know, obligation, but also like we're going to let a lot of people down if we leave and go do something else. But I'm just curious for you, you talk about like obviously new desires, new directions, and being proud of the work that you've done. But what has this been like for your family as you think about kind of the transition and how have they been in the midst of kind of thinking through this journey of change?
Because you've been in this role how long?
Well, in one form or fashion since July of 2001, a long time.
Yeah.
A long time.
And in some cases, in all cases, it's all your children have known.
Oh, it's all my children. And I'll add this to it since we've already gone there. But the dynamic of your kids growing up in an environment where their dad's the leader of church. People have been around. I didn't grow up around church. It's an odd dynamic. Like it is a very odd, especially Bryce, as it relates to transition, because there's all these things from everything from community to how they understand their spirituality, to how they understand which God, their livelihood, like it's all meshed up. So my kids vary. I have a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and then a 12 and 11-year-old girl. My boys have processed a lot. A lot of challenges. Leading in a church the last 3 years has not been an easy thing for anybody that would be leading. So those were very formative years for them. My wife has always said to me, Tyler, it feels like you're made for kind of bigger lands or a bigger ocean. Like this environment is such that the minute you want to be you and explore, it can create problems, and I've heard that, about people that may be more builder oriented is like, they're either solving problems or creating problems, which adds another part of like, I think there's a level of where I am now in this that I have the potential to create even more problems based upon the need of the moment. So, and then there's the personal side. I think my wife, it just makes a lot of sense to her, but I think she's excited. I really do think in the midst of the transition, she's excited, even though we don't have every I dotted and every T crossed of what it all looks like.
I would agree with your wife. I think that you were made for more and grateful for the work you've done in the Phoenix and Arizona. But yeah, so when I look at the basics of who you are, Tyler Johnson, I go, you're about people, and you've always been about people. You've always been about, I can point to numerous people that you have impacted in an amazing way of just encouraging them, whether it be in their faith or in their business or whatever, but just going, you really call people to be true to themselves. And I just see that's what you're doing now is going, there's a level of going, you just need to be you. And I'm excited to see where this goes. And hopefully Bryce and I will be a part of it in some way.
Thanks for listening to this episode of More Than Profit. I hope you enjoyed Tyler's perspective on leading through constant change with honesty and integrity. To stay up to date with More Than Profit, Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and while you're there, drop us a review so others can find us as well. Don't forget to check out our new website at morethanprofit.fm, where we have additional content and past episodes, and we'll be posting some exciting news about upcoming live More Than Profit events. You can also learn more about what's ahead by following us on Twitter at listen_MTP. More Than Profit is a production of Access Ventures and is hosted by Bryce Butler and Brian McKay. Our executive producer is Crystal Escoval, and our associate producer is Bryn McKay. Audio production assistance is provided by Resonate Recording. Our theme song today was No Man's Land by Slapstorm. I'm Bryn McKay, and you've been listening to More Than Profit.